You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit, but your feast is nearly over.
This isn't a blood hole. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon. Why aren't you laughing?
From this moment on, none of you are safe.
Welcome to the Batman Book Club, a podcast exploring the Dark Knight Library. I am your host, Ryan Lauer. You're listening to episode 230, and it's a special episode. It's a special episode because I have a very special guest. If you were listening, you saw that last episode we talked about the Marvel DC crossover comic, Daredevil Batman, Eye for an Eye. Well, here with me today is the writer of that comic, Dan Chichester. Dan, thanks for coming on the Batman Book Club.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I get it wrong half the time, so I'm all into it already.
All right, excellent. I mean, I just asked you about, what you prefer to be called, and I did see an interview on YouTube that somebody had talked to you, and you were like, "It's Dan," but I know that, hey, it's on the comic, it's DG Chichester. That's what I'm going to go with, unless he tells me otherwise. So.
Yeah, I mean that's been the professional credit on most everything, and it's just kind of stuck, and it makes people think I'm English, and
Gotcha.
and probably a lot smarter than I am. But there was a really stupid reason I did that way back. But when we're talking as human beings, get the DG out of the way and just be Dan.
Yeah.
It's very easy.
Dan and Ryan, let's do it.
Yep.
Before we get to talking about the topic, because this is everybody's first time that ever comes on this show, I have to ask them. It's called the Batman Book Club. So, Dan, what is your favorite Batman story?
My favorite Batman story, there's kind of three of them actually,
Ooh,
and they
all
go
right.
back to when I grew up on comics, and Batman was extraordinarily influential to me. Not really knowing I'd become a writer or a storyteller, but I glommed onto three things that made such an impression of the character, but also the way the stories were told. And two of them were Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams stories. One was the Lazarus Pit, the whole Ra's al Ghul, saga. And I just thought that was so incredible, reading it for the first time and being exposed to it. And Denny's use of language, especially, it's the first time I ever came across the word mantra. I remember that, and it occurred to me even then that stories could be about something more. Comic stories, any story could be
Yeah.
about something more because he had these additional layers to it. And I loved the physicality of Batman. I love the interchange with Ra's al Ghul, him coming out of the Lazarus pit the first time. I mean, it just made such a great impression. The other story that stands out to me is I'm pretty sure they did it as well. It was a one shot, and it was like this crazy. I'm a big horror fan, and it was
Yeah.
this vampire story. I don't remember the name of it, but Batman's tracking this vampire in this haunted house, and he can't kill him, and finally he figures out that the heart of the vampire is, in a clock somewhere in the house. And it's like,
Oh, man.
and it's a wild, intense, story. It was kind of in that era where Denny and Neil were shifting everything to the night. It was still Batman was still the happy-go-lucky kind of guy, and they were just turning every story to like a nighttime story.
Uh-huh.
And it just brought like things together in such a cinched up way for me. Um, and then the third one would be like Steve Englehart and Marcia Rogers' work, and especially the Hugo Strange work.
Yes.
It was just so precise, and just, the way Strange was just such an intimidating villain, and overcoming Batman, and you felt like he was actually up against something.
hmm
Um, and I loved Rogers' artwork. I finally got a chance to meet Steve Englehart a couple of years ago in person,
Oh,
and had
nice.
never met him before, and I was like starstruck. It just
Yeah.
all came flooding back to me, like, oh my God, this guy wrote like some of the stuff that
hmm
had, incredible impressions for me. And I'll add one fourth one,
All
which
right.
isn't a book club thing, but
Okay.
the first Batman Arkham video game, I
Yes.
thought was one of the best applications of Batman as a detective and a fighter that had come around in a long, long time. And I absolutely loved playing that game and really feeling that all the notes of him were, were coming through in such a great way. So
I
I've given you a whole
love it.
shelf of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, you're an overachiever. Nobody's ever mentioned, Arkham Asylum before, but it's like, well, Paul Dini had to write the story for that, right? So it
Yeah,
counts. It's a story.
yeah,
Like
yeah. It's
it's
a
a
great
Batman
story.
story. It's a great
It's a
one.
clever story. It's got great dialogue. It's got the detective stuff for me, and it's simple detective stuff, but I
Uh-huh.
loved how they integrated it through the story.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't just fighting, which I think is sometimes often the downside of some Batman stories is where they forget
Hmm.
the whole detective angle.
Yeah. I and I'm just gonna like reverse order now. Strange Apparitions, like later
Hmm.
called Strange Apparitions Collection of Englehart and Rogers. That's one of my
Yep.
favorite Batman stories, favorite Batman runs ever. So, no controversy there. I can't for the life of me think of what this vampire one is though. So
I will
that's gonna,
find it somewhere. I think I still
yes.
have it probably, like in
Okay,
a box, and I'll find it and I'll shoot you the
please do.
the cover or something if I can scan it
Hmm.
in. But I'm sure we could use the Google to find it for us. But
Yeah,
it's a pretty cool one.
yeah, because obviously somebody hears Batman and vampire, like I was thinking, oh, he's talking about Red Rain because I feel like that's the most popular, Batman vampire story. And then
Right.
no, you've got a real good one here for us to go search and hunt down. And then of course the Ra's al Ghul O'Neill Adams stories are
Yeah. Yeah. Top
excellent
notch.
stuff.
Top notch.
Love it. I like that you came not with one, two, three, but four. So thanks for going above and beyond.
I try.
Let's get to talking about the Daredevil Batman story. So
Hmm.
I'm such a I think linear person. I love talking the start. Let's start with the origins and then let's just progress as it went along. So from what you can remember, because the book came out in 1997, so we're approaching 30 years
30
ago.
years. Yeah. God knows.
If hopefully you remember it just like it was yesterday. But how did this even begin? Because in looking up some of your work, and admittedly so, just because I have not read hardly any Daredevil. I've read Born
Hmm.
Again, The Man Without Fear, Daredevil Yellow by Loeb and Sale, and that's about it. My Marvel readings kind of minimal, except for Spider-Man. Same kind of, so I just hadn't read much Marvel, and I saw you had a run with Daredevil before
Yeah.
you did the
I
Batman
was
Daredevil crossover.
totally. I was primary writer of Daredevil, for a big chunk of the 90s. I
Hmm.
mean, I was, well liked in some quarters, probably not well liked in others. Who cares? But but I put my all into it. I love the character. We're not going to spend too much time on him till we
Sure.
get to Eye for an Eye because it's the
Yeah.
Batman book club. But we had done a run on Daredevil called Fall from Grace, which
Hmm.
was pretty well received and had given and all the ones you've read of Daredevil are great choices, by the way. But it had given the book a little bit of a boost, especially at that time. There's a lot of Spider-Man attention, a lot of
Hmm.
mutant attention, not a lot of attention for Daredevil. Right now, of course, he's all over the place
Yeah.
with the TV show and such. But so we had a little bit of mojo going on. So we had actually lined up a few things happening. We had some other mini-series planned. We were doing almost like a little mini Daredevil universe and some spin-off, books, one shots, this kind of thing. And as part of that, I had a great relationship with Ralph Macchio, who was the editor, and I had said, Ralph, everyone's always talking Batman, Daredevil, Daredevil, Batman. They're always making comparisons. They're not really the
Hmm.
same character at all, but one's, works in the night and he's tough and gritty. The other works in the night, he's tough and gritty. Fans were always clamoring for this. Why don't we make this happen? Ralph had a great relationship with Denny. At one point, Ralph had been Denny's assistant at
Hmm.
Marvel before Denny kind of got driven out of Marvel and went to DC. And and I said, could we make this happen? And Ralph loved the idea. And in that point in time, you could pick up the phone, not go through a bunch of lawyers or top things and sort
Yeah.
of almost instigate things. And he did, and not only were we getting Denny on it, but I had started on Daredevil uh, leading up to issue 300. which was going to be a big deal, and it was a story that we ended up calling Last Rites, which was the fall of the Kingpin. It was the first time the Kingpin would really be taken down. And my partner on that, my art partner, was a guy named Lee Weeks.
Yeah.
And you probably know him from some of his
Batman.
amazing Batman work.
Yeah.
Uh, and and so we lured Lee back for this one shot. So we had a perfect package. We had all this mojo going on, with Daredevil, and then we had Lee back, and so everything seemed lined up good. And then stuff went south.
Yeah. Ugh. Ah,
So tell me when you want to pivot to that, because
let's
that was
pivot
all the
right.
good stuff.
Let's
Let's
just keep going. So we've
keep
got the
going.
origin now. It seems like the train's on the track and we're about to
Right.
take off.
So what happened then was Ralph had edited Daredevil forever
Mhm.
through, Born Again, through Ann Nocenti, who was a fabulous writer, is a fabulous writer who worked on Daredevil prior to me, had shepherded the book forever and loved the character extraordinarily well. Shake up an editorial. Daredevil gets pulled out of Ralph's office, given to another group, who are going to do street level heroes over here with, you know, some kind of mix and match. And so suddenly the project is up in the air. All the mini series, all the other side projects I just mentioned, they went away. They weren't going to happen. Um, and this book was kind of, where is this? Like, what's
Yeah.
happening? And Lee got very nervous and kind of pressed, for a guarantee that um, he would be paid the rate that he had been promised. He'd been promised, I think, a special rate for it, which he deserved, um, and got no commitments on that. So he walked. So we didn't
Yeah.
have an artist anymore. And I was getting some very dodgy signals. It was good. If it was going to happen, it was going to stay in Ralph's office. Ralph had sort of maintained control of this one project, as it were. But there weren't clear signals that it was going to happen, or that I would actually even be on it if it was going to happen.
Hmm.
And so I got a letter of commitment from the editor in chief, but it was a very terse one. It was like, as long as you maintain storytelling standards, you will be the writer on the book. And it's kind of like, dudes,
Yeah.
I've been working for this company for the better part of 10 years. I had been on staff. I had written a ton of characters. Um, it's kind of a little bit of a, you know, poke in
Yeah.
the eye. And maybe that's where the eye for the eye title came from. I don't know. But, so it was, in this really weird in between place for a little
Hmm.
bit too long, and didn't feel like it was going to happen. And then suddenly, Ralph was like, no, everything's moving, but we didn't have an artist. But we were able to lure Scott McDaniel onto it, who you also probably know from the Batman universe.
Yeah.
Uh, but Scott had been my partner on that Fall from Grace story, as well as others.
Nice.
So we had a good working relationship. There was good synergy, and there was a little bit of a cachet, for us teaming up again, because he
Hmm.
had been off Daredevil at that point for a little while. So that put us into the motion of, okay, now we got to do something with this story. And this would be the first one. I know there'd ultimately be three of them, I think, three of the team ups over time, but this would be the first Daredevil Batman, team up of those.
So in your case where rumblings, it seems like this is starting to like this is going to happen.
Hmm.
Are you, I've always wondered, when does the idea for the story, when does the writer's plotting actually begin? Is it after you get the official like hiring, or are you supposed to work on it and then propose, an idea and then it moves forward? So for you, I guess specifically on this one,
Hmm.
what was that like?
Well, this first half of your question, it can go either way, right?
Okay. Yeah.
You can, if you're trying something new, or there's an opening on something, you can pitch the storyline, and then they'll accept it, and then you'll go forward. And certainly that's how I won the Daredevil assignment in the first place. The Daredevil book was coming up for grabs. I had written a proposal, and so had a thousand other people, I'm sure, and somehow it got accepted. In this case, because the project had sort of been initiated with me and Ralph, um, I didn't need to pitch the story. But because of the back and forth and, ups and downs leading up to it, I
Hmm.
also hadn't done a lot of thinking about it. And
Okay.
in fact, my thinking about it initially was a little bit, I would say, uh, tarnished, because,
Sure.
it sort of felt, does anyone really want to do this now? Like, we're not being,
Yeah.
this should be a kind of a gold standard project, it feels like, and it's not really getting the sense of love that,
Hmm.
it felt like it should. So I hadn't done a lot of the thinking until that point where it was really a go. And then I did, start thinking, okay, what's the plot? But I would say that in all the honesty of 30 years later, um, that tarnishing probably affected me because my first plot was shit. Excuse me if we
Yeah.
don't swear on the
No, it's fine.
podcast. It
Swear
was,
away.
and I can't even remember what it was. It was just
Okay.
bad, and I kind of knew it was bad. But I sent it to Ralph anyway, and he was like, "Yes, it's not going to work."
Yeah.
Uh,
I wondered that as well of if you had how the story had possibly changed if at all, but like during that time period where it seemed it's a go, a couple setbacks, and then Lee leaves, do
right.
you start to remold the story or if it stuck to what you'd envisioned?
Well, there wasn't much envisioning there at that point.
Sure.
It wasn't until that go point that I think the envisioning really sort of began, and we had the go ahead. And once I sort of realized, I had done a poor job or admitted to doing a poor job, and that was unusual. I really think I hit the mark most of the time, and like I said, I had
Hmm.
a good relationship with Ralph, so Ralph was always, a lot of good back and forth, good story notes and such. So for Ralph to just come right out and be like, "This ain't working,"
Yeah.
um, I really threw that out and went back to the drawing board and started to rethink, okay, what could this be? What should this be? And of course, ultimately, there would be, um, serving not one but two master slash editors on this because
Yeah.
Denny O'Neill, that guy,
Yeah.
would also be
Never heard of him.
um, yeah, would also be part of the mix in terms of approving the story and having feedback. And I knew Denny from when he had been at Marvel, and I was kind of an assistant before I'd moved up. But I didn't know him that well, and I was probably a little bit, not probably, I was a little bit intimidated by him.
Sure.
And so I had that to work through as well. So once that first plot was damaged goods,
Hmm.
I went back to the drawing board and started to kind of like really think about, all right, how does this work? What does it have to be? I can't even remember if the first one um, utilized Two-Face and Hyde.
Yeah.
It probably did. I mean, I think I love Two-Face as a villain,
Hmm.
and I wanted to do something that wasn't the expected Joker.
Yeah.
So I thought the Two-Face angle was a good one. And then very early on, one of the few things I can remember is was the lawyer hook, right? Matt
Oh,
Murdock,
yeah.
Daredevil, being a lawyer, and suddenly, wait a minute, you've got one of the primary Batman villains was a lawyer as well. There's got to be a place we can play this out. I would have rather have just done a book about the two of them, probably at the end of the day.
Oh, there's like a little like ding, ding, ding of what you've said of like, okay, I have questions for that part. I have questions for that part. I have questions for that part. So let's go to
Yeah.
no no disrespect to Ralph, but you got Denny O'Neill on one
Hmm.
hand, one of the greatest in the medium, period.
Yeah. No, no question.
At this point, sticking with, writing for this story, how much collaboration, like, did you work with him on anything? Like, did you directly talk to Denny about the story?
Oh yeah, Denny
Yeah, okay.
schooled me hard
Yeah.
a couple of and diplomatically, nicely, but I
Sure.
remember one moment, and it's even kind of acknowledged by a line from Batman in the story a bit, where I had something about, I think I had him driving the Batmobile,
Hmm.
from Gotham or something, and Denny was like, literally, what do you think he does drive this on the open road. Like this is just going to be like on I-95 or going through toll roads. Like how does this work? If you want to bring this to New York City, you got to cover this off. So there was that sort of dialogue, back and forth as we went through some iterations of the plot to make it
Hmm.
work out. All spot on, but he didn't have um, obviously the guy knew the character, was a phenomenal editor, was a literate editor and writer. So I took everything he had to say very seriously
Hmm.
and tried to accommodate that and tried to raise the game as much as I could, with that and not fall back on, well, Ralph's my editor,
Yeah.
and in that way, maybe the bigger situation around Daredevil sort of worked to the advantage of this because I felt, I had to, there was no safety net like around it as it were. So that's good sometimes to, make you really test your mettle on things.
Yeah. Let's see. What was that was my one ping with Denny. The next one being your choosing of villains. So,
Hmm.
me reading this was
Hmm.
my first exposure to Hyde. I didn't know anything
Hmm.
about Hyde. Um, just the name alone is perfect to match up with someone like Two-Face.
Right.
Because instantly it's like, okay, well that makes sense. And then fortunately, Batman just has a great selection of rogues gallery
Oh
that
yeah.
it is like, well, no, we don't. As much as I love the Joker, I fear overexposure of Joker. I don't want him
Hmm.
in every single Batman story. And Two-Face is such a great character. And I think in what I'd said on this on the last episode talking about the book too is that one of the strengths with Two-Face is that Harvey Dent's still alive. And I think
Right.
people will really latch on to realistic things. As much as they like escapism, what is the hook is when stuff still is humanizing and still
Hmm.
realistic in that internal battle that Harvey Dent has of he just wants, we all have moments of just wanting to, this is what I want to say. Ah! And Two-Face, half of
Exactly.
him does that. And then the other half is still like, ugh, I can't. And the internal struggle. I just think that's a very, like, that's why Two-Face is such a great character. And
Hmm.
that I feel like that does play an important aspect of the story as well. How
Oh,
long,
very much. Yeah.
not how long, but did you, I should say, how quickly did you decide on Two-Face being included?
I this is an emotional feeling more than anything factual because
Yeah.
my mind is foggy around
And I'm
those details.
ridiculous. Like, what day of
Yeah,
the week were you writing
yeah,
this story in the
exactly. Like,
90s?
how many hours did it take you
Yes,
for each one?
exactly.
But I think that was a very quick thing. I think for the
Yeah.
same reasons. I love the Joker. Joker's a fun villain, no question. But even then, I think the sense of the Joker was overexposed.
Mhm.
The Joker was in a lot of places. The Killing Joke had come out only a few years earlier. I didn't want to try to compete with that in my own mind. But Two-Face, was an interesting,
Mhm.
villain. He's just an interesting character, as you just described, on his on any day of the week. But the lawyer angle is probably what just like cinched it for me.
Mhm.
Once I thought about, oh, I love wait a minute, Two-Face is a lawyer, or Two-Face, was a lawyer. I've got a character who is, his whole thing is being a lawyer and a vigilante. There's got to be something there that we can work with, and let's not just play that out. Let's give them, a little bit of shared history, that they might have crossed paths in law school or at some other point.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of gifts that you sort of, look for, and then you try to build things, around them, which I tried to do. I think I did Hyde a disservice in this. I mean, Hyde was the obvious or one of the obvious Marvel villains because he is a twofer, in his own way, with the Hyde and the um, uh, his alter ego. But I don't play that out as much as in retrospect I wish I had. I think there was a little bit more. I treated him more like a plot device, a bit of an incubator, than I did play the duality aspect quite as much.
Well, I took note of that. I think even in the discussion that I had with on that last episode, my friend Eric, and said,
Hmm.
I could see that, and also like you had two worlds colliding, and you only had 48 pages to do it.
Right.
So like
Yeah.
something also like probably needs to get, trimmed some. And of the four main characters, because I didn't know Hyde, I didn't bother me at all, you know?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I
That's
think
good.
there's plenty of time given to the other three that I did know. Because just because I hadn't read Daredevil very much doesn't mean I know who the character is. And I'm
Totally.
aware and stuff. So and that leads perfectly on how you just brought in the Harvey Dent Matt Murdock link. I love it when there is something that has been there all along and just didn't
Hmm.
even think about it. And then
Yep.
that going to that page of the flashback, a link in the two, and I'm like, son of a bit, of course. They're lawyers. They're both lawyers. Like it
Yeah,
just makes sense.
right.
Perfect link.
And obviously with Two Faces, MO and his villainy leading the day, I don't know how much that gets acknowledged or remembered unless there's flashbacks to his origin. I would
Hmm.
imagine some writers and creators have done very interesting stuff with that, but I don't know that it always leads the day, and
Yeah.
but here it was a good place for me to hang hang some emotional components of the story around,
Yeah.
which would then also gave some um, power to Daredevil slash Matt Murdock's and his point of view around him, and then Batman's point of view around him. A
Yeah.
little bit like there's hope, it's hopeless,
Hmm.
and that sort of gave a nice uh, menage a trois, if you want,
Yeah.
between the three of them.
And great visual as well in the flashback too that we highlighted of Lady Justice and how Harvey jumps on one and is like, I need
Yeah,
you to balance it. And I'm like, every angle of this is awesome. Like visually, metaphorically, how Two-Face is constantly with Justice and leaning back and forth. And the villain, eventually he's gonna be the villain doing that, and then Murdoch's the hero
right.
and he's got to help balance it. Like it's such, I don't want to say it's such a small, but that panel or panels specifically are just like a great highlight, I think, of the whole book. And
Well,
so
that's great.
if that was a basis for like where your story or the seed for the story or something, then it is like mission accomplished. Like
It,
I just really
super.
value it. I like that. I think it's really good. Um
And
Batman.
Scott was really good about
Yeah, let's talk about him.
finding those type of he was very good about finding those type of visual interpretations. We had a good synergy again, I think, in terms of the way we'd work together. And I always knew that no matter what he did, it would be a very powerful visualization of the things
Hmm.
I was trying to describe. It wasn't always exactly what I saw in my mind's eye, but it was actually, even though I didn't know it, I guess, So,
Yeah.
he'd bring that extra, flair or effect or, um, structure to a page.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was wondering, and I cannot remember, and I haven't talked to Scott in a while, and when I have, this hasn't come up, but I'm really curious myself about the page layouts and if he was leaving those because I wrote plots. I wrote Marvel style,
Uh-huh.
so they were very detailed plots, and they would often indicate dialogue and such like that. But they never would have indicated longer form copy or longer form prose or captions. And so, I'm wondering if he designed those pages with that open space that I then chose to kind of write as narrative,
Hmm.
for balloons to go in their place or not. I don't remember why I made that choice to kind of articulate parts of the story as little narrative blocks, but stylistic, I guess.
I'm always interested in the like this discussion between writer and artist and like that right there alone of it's not, which came first, the chicken or the egg, because obviously the writer comes up with the plot and like that's the
Hmm.
basis, and then they go from there. But it's, what was the collaboration like with him, especially in the 90s, where like here now you can hop on a Zoom call like we are and talking, whereas then surprise people, Zoom wasn't around in the mid 90s. Like, so how do
Right,
you work with
right.
an artist then? Like,
Well, I mean, we would talk on the phone,
yeah.
quite often, not as visual,
Hmm.
but you discuss the plot points. You'd say what you were kind of going for. Um, Once they received the plot, those pre-discussions would have probably influenced the plot to some degree. Once you got the plot, there'd be questions back and forth, maybe about what are we trying to go for here, or I'm thinking this instead. And because we had had a history of good collaboration,
Yeah.
whatever we discussed, I would have been, yeah, whatever you think, Scott. But I don't recall, calling for that kind of page layout,
Hmm.
like sort of like leave me big open spaces because I want to fill these in with like narrative blocks. Doesn't feel like
Yeah.
something I would have done, but something about looking at the page at that point, spoke to whoever I was then in a certain way and made me then decide to, write it in that style.
Hmm. And I imagine with you two having a prior history of working
Hmm.
together, that there isn't going to be a negative surprise from
No.
either one of you toward the other person. And so maybe not in your case, but like, are you aware of times, does it happen or no, of the artist provides, this is my panel, my visual, and the writer says, oh, that's not what I was working with. Can you redo it? Or is it usually the artist, what they provide, like this is the final image?
Well, a good editor, which Ralph was,
Yeah.
and is, would usually see page layouts. Somebody would do
Yeah.
page breakdowns, ahead of time. So the storytelling is going to work and
Hmm.
is going to hit all the things. I don't know if Scott did those, for this, but Scott again was a known quantity, so less to worry about in that respect. And anything that Scott would do, in my estimation and experience, that was different was
Yeah.
better. I have worked in instances where um, I did one story, and I will not name names. It
Name them
was
all now. No.
names now. Demand you say it.
Yeah.
Where I had gone to great, I thought, clever detail to sort of like describe uh, a scene that was going to enter into a whatever, call it a secret lab or something. You were going to look
Hmm.
over the shoulders of the hero characters, and you were going to see the length of this lab or whatever. It was going to reveal the trick. The gadget in the lab was going to be an important story point. And and instead, what I got back was the artist clearly just wanted to draw a beefcake, cheesecake shot. And so he had reversed the whole image. And so instead of getting any detail of the lab, all we got was these two like, you know, power poses of the
Hmm.
characters. And I went to the editor and I said, this isn't like anything near what it should be.
Yeah.
And instead of kind of taking it up, the editor was like, well, the book's kind of late and he was late and we'll just have to go with it. So I had to end up writing the most awful dialogue of the
Hmm.
characters literally saying, my God, do you see what I see? Yes, in front of us is, and then having to describe what should have been a visual,
Yeah.
thing. So it can go either way, if you have a good lead time and you have some, uh, situations of, um, where you've got a good dialogue with the editor and the artist, you can get some things tweaked. I'm doing a comic right now for Black Box Comics, a smaller publisher, and the artist made a couple of choices, and I said, well, I think we want to go with this instead. I think this is more
Hmm.
brutal or more indicative of what we're trying to go for, and a little back and forth, and he was like, oh, okay, I get what you're trying to do, and we just retooled that panel or that splash, and you keep moving on from there.
Sure. Well, since this was not your first rodeo with
Hmm.
Daredevil, this
Yep.
was, if I'm correct, your first writing of Batman.
And only the only other
Okay.
Batman universe stuff I did was a Huntress story in an annual. So this was my big swing at the Dark Knight. And,
So what goes into your head if you can remember, like what are the requirements for you? And then if since you were talking to Denny O'Neil, then did he, give you a speech or like a rundown or something of like this is the approach of the character, or do you just kind of let you have at it and see what you came up
yeah,
with?
I mean, as I said, he sort of commented on things like the Batmobile and other stuff to kind of make sure I wasn't breaking rules or
Yeah.
doing disservice or something stupid or whatever. But I kind of had a somewhat of a have at it um, license once I passed that first unworkable plot.
Hmm.
And once I got over that, whatever those issues were, I was just channeling my fandom,
Yeah.
of the character and the things I liked about it from stories like we just talked about a little while ago,
Hmm.
led me down the path of who he could be, for this
Yeah.
story and how he would function um, with Daredevil, who I knew very, very well. But I didn't want to make this, just a Daredevil story with a Batman guest star. I tried to want to give them, a little bit equal weight in terms of scenes and such. But and that led to things like the scenes where, he was doing a little bit of a deductive takedown on Daredevil. Daredevil thinks he's
Hmm.
all full of himself, and Batman's like, you incline your head 2 degrees to the right, and you flare your nostrils. You've clearly got some kind of sensory,
Yeah.
advantage, and just
Classic Batman.
kn- yeah,
Great
knocks him
stuff.
back on his heels, right? So,
Hmm.
um, even though I had would never work on the character again, I had just a huge appreciation of him as a comics fan, as a comics
Hmm.
reader. So as that's kind of um, the gift of being able to work in comics from a
Yeah.
creative point of view is that you're able to then channel that stuff into it. And because this would be the first Daredevil Batman team up, because Denny O'Neil was on it, et cetera, I wanted to do my best work
Yeah.
possible at that time on it. So I tasked myself to get to that. And as I said, when we were trading notes back and forth on whatever,
Hmm.
I think there's more in the green than the red, but there's some red stuff. There's some stuff I would redo if I could.
I think an artist, writer, like a visual artist, whoever, like it's almost like sometimes your work's never done because if you go back to it, I think you'll always, there's stuff that I've done that, go back and I'm like, oh, I'd have changed, it's final, it's done, but I'd have
Hmm.
changed that. Oh, I'd have changed that. Now, just, I don't
Sure.
know what it is, but it's never done, whatever it is.
Right. Right.
Um, do you feel, I'm not going to ask like specifics, do you feel some of those changes would be more towards Batman, more towards Daredevil. We already know the Hyde part, like you said, or you just think maybe as a story overall.
Story structure, I think
Okay.
overall, I think at a certain point, I think it kicks in pretty well, but I think
Hmm.
I don't like the meet cute, you know, at odds opening. It's a very sort of expected type of introduction of the characters, where um, they meet, they're at odds, they fight a little bit, and then they sort of, you know, I guess we'll grudgingly get along to sort of solve this. That's a pretty standard trope in team ups and get-togethers on this. And
Was that part of the mandate for these Marvel DC crossovers? Because I know at least each one, so there's for the Marvel ones, it was Daredevil, Batman, and then the DC one that Alan Grant wrote was Batman, Daredevil, and
mhm.
then I know that and in reading this, neither neither of the two heroes, it seems like equal billing, equal screen time for both, and neither one is worse or better than the other. They're pretty equal as far as like
Yeah.
heroic in the whole book. I
Hmm.
just feel like that. I don't know. You're the first one I've ever talked to about that actually was in the room doing working on these crossovers. I feel like that was probably like a mandate that they had like a structure of this is how this is gonna go in order for
Well,
these to work.
I think there's an inherent structure, yes, that, they're going to get equal, they get equal billing no matter what order the names come in.
Yeah,
And the Allen one was, published by DC, so they flipped, the
yeah,
titling on it. Um, and uh, you're never going to get it across both editorial, um, desks if you treat Batman like a fool, or
yeah,
he's given 3 pages, or vice versa, right? They have to kind of come at it in an equal way. And it's a story about both of them. I wasn't trying to tell a Daredevil story, like I said, guest starring Batman.
yeah.
Although that would have been easier for me, maybe in some ways. Um, but again, I think the convention for me of, heroes clash, they fight, and you see it all the time, right? It's the first time they meet, it's like, I'm at odds with you, you're at odds with me, and then they team up.
Hmm.
So I don't know what I would do different. I've not thought it through that much, but I sort of feel that the standard that was a standard convention slash trope 30 years ago.
Hmm.
So I feel like I could have done better to kind of get them together somehow. I'm not sure how, maybe it would have been maybe playing more into, maybe Daredevil would have realized something and recruited Batman to the city, like Two-Face is here.
Yeah,
I need your perspective on this. I have this perspective on that. That I don't know where that would have
yeah,
gone, but just something that,
sure.
felt more mo different, I don't know, than just
Hmm.
that thing. Because once you're sort of past that, the story kind of makes its way, but it's almost like I have to get them duking it out because people expect that. They want to see a
Yeah,
little Batman Daredevil headbutting,
yeah.
horns and
Um,
cowls and
y- so a couple things. I'm glad you already brought up. Well, you already brought up the Harvey Dent, Matt Murdock. You brought up Batman detectiving
hmm
Daredevil senses. Something that I highlighted at the end that I really appreciate is when a writer doesn't just like beat us over the head like we're dummies, and subtleness of disarming at the end, and the color, like the code is color coded, and Daredevil just says oh, and then Batman let me help. Like I'm just glad of like Batman, I don't know what it is because I can't see, remember? Oh yeah, Daredevil. You can't see.
Right.
Here, I'll help you. It's just like, nah, we'll
Oh,
get it. And it's just a good like,
so you read my original script, in other words, that
oh,
was
you did? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll cut that out. I didn't want to. I have
You don't want to
no
embarrass
faith
me.
in these comic book readers. I have to lay it out for them. But th I like sometimes that it's like a writer is just like they'll get it. I don't
Hmm
have to write it all out and explain it, completely. And it's two, two vertical panels that do it,
Right.
but it's just like it's a good moment of the two heroes like working together. They're not clashing. They're working together.
Yeah. And that's the arc, of it, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, I don't think they're at a respect place, especially with the last scene where, like, Bruce Wayne is all like, "What the hell are you doing in my
Yeah.
city?" Type of thing. And um, but it is uh there is a cooperation, right? There is something there. They both contributed something positive to the adventure and the solving and the stoppage of the crime, wave, as it were. But uh, so I think that's where you ultimately want to get with that, right? Some kind of little more than détente, but not quite like we ain't
Mhm.
brothers, we ain't, partners, we ain't friends, type of thing.
Yeah. In that same moment, I mean, on the next page, and Daredevil even says to Harvey of like, I thought you were a risk taker, and Two-Face says, don't make any mistake about me, Red. Anything that happened here tonight was simply the last of Harvey Dent. this story continues in our heads. Is that the last of Harvey Dent,
Yeah,
or is Harvey Dent still, he
right.
still sticks around? What do you think?
I think there's always going to be some Harvey Dent and Two-Face,
Yes.
but it's a good line for Two-Face to say, so that's
Oh
why it
yeah.
gets on the page.
Yep.
And obviously I would never come back to it. And I don't think anybody's ever picked up on it again. Technically I think it's a what if or an Elseworlds, type of story. It sort of exists in a non-continuity
Yeah.
range, so somebody's never going to play off it, but it does give a sort of a feeling that there was something, there was an arc there, right?
Hmm.
And that arc was almost an opposite arc because Daredevil slash Matt Murdock was able to pull out a little bit of Harvey's humanity,
Yeah.
when clearly for much of the story, Two-Face is dominating, everything. So that's good for the hero and good for the villain, a little bit to have something like that happen where it's not just, curses foiled again and
Hmm.
running on from there. So no, I was always very, and I'm rarely very satisfied, but I always liked that dynamic,
Yeah.
that happened between them.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, a couple of specific questions because I haven't asked you specific questions already.
Go, no,
Um,
please. I ramble, so shut me up, please.
no, never. What of this from your duties, what are you maybe most proud of with the story?
Um, I'm going to just go back to the Harvey Matt
Yeah.
Murdock thing. I think that's um, to overcast myself. I think that was a little bit of creative genius, to sort of find that hook
Yeah.
and be able to play that out and have it work, not just as a, oh yeah, we knew each other back at, Columbia or wherever it was, but that it becomes sort of integrated into the story. I think that hits. I think it hits the right note on a lot of levels. So
Hmm.
I'm very, very remain pleased with that. I mean, you can search people who really like the story, and if I really want to get myself anxious and depressed, I can find reviews that you know tear it down um,
Don't do it.
and hate it. No, don't
Don't
go
do
there.
it.
But that I'll defend. I'll always defend that. I think that was a
Yeah,
really keen and clever way to kind of get into the world.
for sure. Um, it was recently announced that there's going to be more DC Marvel books coming out later
Yeah,
this year.
I
So
saw
with
that.
that topic in mind, if you were to pin, okay, you can't pin them up again together. If you were to do one for Marvel and one for DC, who from DC would you pair up with Daredevil, and who from Marvel would you pair up with Batman? If you got to write two of these stories.
Two more of these. Wow.
Yeah,
That would be kind of cool. I
it
would
would.
think, I don't think it's going to happen, but it would be cool. The Doctor Strange and Batman, I think would be a
Oh
great
wow.
combination, because they're both flowy and and I like the contrast of the mysticism and the science, the deductive, power of it. I
Yeah.
think there could be a real good contrast and a lot of visual like stylism there.
Hmm.
And I think there's even like a crossover, in the middle, possibly between the mysticism and, things like I said, like that first Batman story, with mantras and such like that. He's clearly studied,
Yeah,
many different like philosophies and practices. So there could be something very interesting there. I think that would be a really cool, way to sort of bring things in. The Daredevil side of it, interesting. Give me a sec.
sure.
Who would that be? Uh, this is just playing to my fan favoritism,
Counts.
but I think a Green Lantern Daredevils thing would harken back to another one of my favorites, which was Green Lantern Green Arrow, again, Denny and Neil Adams. Um, and I think that uh, I think there'd be something really interesting there. aside from the contrast between the green and the red, and it feel like so make it a Christmas story.
Yeah.
But I think I think there could be something really interesting because of the sense of will in that. Daredevil has an indomitable sense of, will. He's kind of like the
Hmm.
original, like, knock me down, I'll get back up again, type. And I think Green Lantern, has the same. I don't know which. I mean, I would go to Hal Jordan. I don't even think Hal Jordan's in play anymore, but whatever one would be appropriate, with the
Yeah.
exception of the one who's a total jerk.
Guy Gardner.
Yeah, Guy Gardner. He wouldn't fit the model so well, but he
So
might.
those
But
are interesting picks. I thought you were going to say with Green Lantern and Daredevil because of the of fear. And you got
hmm
the man without fear, and then you've got Green Lantern where fear plays an important role in what they do. And then Batman and Doctor Strange, I just go with like the capes are very important for both of them. So hey,
Exactly,
there we go.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, you,
So
you start with some visual things, and
yeah.
sometimes but you can make the characters work well, and I think there's a
Hmm.
richness uh, to both that you
For
could
sure.
you could play out.
Hmm. When it comes to Scott McDaniel's art, I would never ask you to pick a favorite. But is there an image that you think of besides the cover for this story? When this story is ever mentioned, whenever you think about this story, is there an image that you're like, oh yeah, that drawing by Scott?
I don't remember what page it is, but there's like I don't know where it is. It's somewhere over the shelf, but there's just a it's kind of almost the cover, but there's a two shot of them kind of like in motion, or they're like on a rooftop, which
Jumping
I
off the
think is
roof.
pretty, yeah, which I think is pretty strong.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think he has like a totally iconic moment. Yeah,
That one?
exactly, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That one works really strong for me. Um, and I like that a lot. There was a lot to pack into the story, so I don't think, Scott got a lot of, you know, sp spreads, splashes, money shots, as it were. But that one I think works out really nicely.
I'll just answer my own question. For me, I love the Batman jumping in the sewers and he's like in kind of in shadow creeping behind
Mm,
Daredevil. Because
hmm
to me, I always say it on here all the time. I love images where you get no context and your mind can just create a story. And I'm like, oh, this
Right.
is this is Batman. Like the man with the like all senses working extremely well can't sense that Batman's behind him because Batman's
Yeah,
that good. And I think you even
right.
put it in there somewhere, didn't you? Of like Batman is that good or I'm that good or something in the story. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I again, why I chose that approach to writing it, because it wasn't my typical, but a third person. The book gets written, from a third person point of view, and most of the
oh.
time I would do a Daredevil story. It would be like a first person narrative, but
Hmm.
but clearly that wouldn't work for both of them,
Yeah.
being in the story. So it probably influenced my choice. But yeah, there's definitely like a line like that.
And coming at it from a complete fan's perspective, would you like to
hmm
see this adapted in animation?
I think it would be a fun animation.
Yeah.
I think, all three of them all three of the crossovers would be kind of like a cool little like mini movie of, you know, taking them all through.
Hmm.
I don't remember the third as clearly, but I remember Alan's, and I liked Alan's a lot. But uh, y- yeah, I mean, this
Yeah.
would be a ball to sort of see this come to
I
life.
think so
But
too.
it's funny. Sometimes if I'm at a convention, I'll have like a print of this, for sale, or like, that I'll autograph or something. Um, and the number of people who don't know it exists is, I know it's a 30-year-old book, but it just feels like it would have been more well known that had been Batman Daredevil crossovers. So
Yeah.
many people are often like, there was a Batman Daredevil crossover. It's like,
It's
but
it's so weird because it's something that they just printed the omnibus last year
I
that
know. Yep.
that combined all of them. But then it's just always prior to that, and even that omnibus, I think now is starting to get sold out and hard to find. It's just always hard to find.
Yeah,
So,
maybe,
I mean,
maybe
I
that's
was
it.
very late to the game on knowing that there were crossovers. I saw that there was a Spider-Man one like
Hmm. Hmm.
years ago, and I just had no idea of the they're like, oh yeah, this happened in the back half of the 90s, and it actually happened, I think, the back half of the 70s. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, there were some of the
What?
oversized ones in the 70s. Yeah, I remember those. And it was easier then. It
Yeah.
was literally it was a phone call. Most editors were friends, and they would call and say, "Hey, how about it?" And they would both say yes, and then they'd walk down the hall to the publisher's office, and the publisher would be like, "Yeah, yeah, I'll have sales run the numbers," and probably by that afternoon they had agreed to do it. There wasn't all the overhead of mega corporations and mega
Yep.
lawyers and stuff. So that's more credit to Marie Javins and CB Sobolski on this recent announcement that they're going to do these
Yeah.
crossovers, that they got somebody to overcome what must be
It
a tangle of legal
Yeah,
issues.
I was gonna say it really surprises me that
Yeah.
in 2025 that they're actually going to more surprising, I think, because of who owns Marvel and they would actually allow something like this, because it just seems they're very protective of all their material. And I just like, oh, and they've got all the lawyers, I'm sure. Boring talk, but it's just like really surprising to me of like,
Yeah.
wow,
I
more of
mean,
these are
it's
actually coming. Like
right, right.
that's a victory. Like, cool.
Totally. Totally. I mean, that was always the fun fandom thing, of it.
Yeah,
They did I don't know if you're familiar with it. Maybe it was in the omnibus, but they did these things amalgam, like
yeah.
in the late 90s, right? Where they literally merged the characters, right? And then
Hmm.
that was a blender, but fans loved it, because
Hmm.
most of them were well executed. And also it was like, yeah, what if Wolverine did have the powers of, the Flash or whatever the combos were? I
We
can't.
all had toys when we were kids, and there were no rules, like
Right,
Wolverine and
right.
Batman were fighting and stuff. So
Yeah,
to live that out again, like a few years ago where they did, I don't know if you'd seen of Batman and the Ninja Turtles, and they actually did comics.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I like those are my two worlds colliding in a way that I couldn't even like keep it in. I was
yep,
and then the
yep,
comics were
yep.
just as fun as I'd imagined that they were. So for this, I'm sure for Marvel and DC comic fans, it was probably a similar feeling for them too. They were getting like the best, getting their
Hmm.
cake and eating it too. Whatever you want to,
Yeah,
saying you want
yeah.
to
A wild
put in
ride.
there.
Totally.
Definitely. Is there maybe anything that I hadn't asked that you thought I would, or anything else that you want to say on this that we haven't covered before I go ahead and wrap us up?
Um, no, I mean, I think you hit me with some really good questions. I appreciate you
Oh,
doing the,
thank
the
God.
research. Obviously, you just did a program about it. So, um, is there anything I didn't answer? Or,
I want to know what Denny O'Neil's home address was, his phone number, his email. No, it's just
Um,
I've never gotten to talk to anybody that's gotten, and it's not talk to somebody that's gotten to, in the room with Denny O'Neil and talking and stuff. And so like from both as a fan and then, also as a professional that you're
mhm.
talking to him. And it's like, yeah, I love hearing behind the scenes stuff. So to hear your perspective and what that was like that's something I'm in tune to listen to. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, he was great, intuitive, knowledgeable, again, so very literate, low key, but obviously knew his stuff. So low key
Mhm.
is sometimes more intimidating than than like, coming down
Yeah.
like a ton of bricks on stuff. So if in retrospect, I wish I had been a little bit more um self-assured. I mean, I think I was at that point in my age and career and mindset. I was sort of straddling this, that weird bridge of self-assurance and total imposter syndrome anxiety. So, it's just never a good formula for anything, because
Hmm.
you feel like you're trying to prove yourself, but at the same time doubting yourself. And
Yeah.
and if I could advise that version of myself again, I'd ask him to chill out and take advantage of that conversation with Denny
Yeah.
more, not just about corrective things, but sort of like play it out more.
Yeah.
Because Denny had also written Daredevil, right? Denny also knew the character, like I knew Ralph's perspective on it, which I valued hugely and gained a
Hmm.
lot from. But it would have been really interesting in retrospect to get more Denny into this story, and his perspective and where that might have taken things. If he was willing to give it, like I don't know like how much he saw this as something he wanted to participate in, or if it was, I need to be the brand steward of this character and make sure nothing gets screwed up.
Yeah. I mean, and then on the other hand, of just like me, just someone in listening too, is, maybe the questioning of the Batmobile was just like him getting into your mind of like, oh, how do you perceive this? Because this is a Dan Chichester story. Like, how would you do this? So, I mean, the story you can stand behind of like that story is pure
Hmm.
you, right? Like,
Yeah,
you did
yeah,
that.
yeah.
You weren't
Right,
forced to write
right.
something a certain way.
No, no, no.
That's a
And
you story. So that's good.
I've rarely had that,
Yeah.
but good editors,
Hmm.
and both of them were very good editors, will still help you tell your story. And then, but you take advantage of that. You have a
Yeah.
sounding board of that back and forth, which again, in retrospect, uh I would like to have tapped into that more to sort of see
Gotcha.
where it
Sure.
goes and what I could have gotten out of it. Wouldn't have changed it from being my story. Neither one were being um, dictatorial in terms of saying, well, the story has to be about this, and you have
Hmm.
to like leave the characters here because we're setting them up for
Yeah.
crossover two or something like that. Sometimes you hear stories from creative creators, and I've been in those situations on some books where, there's a big committee of editors and everything has to tie into certain big, larger
Yeah.
crossover stories, and you're much more hamstrung in terms of where you have to go.
Absolutely.
But that was not the case with this.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that. This is definitely, there's no research or homework. You can just grab this and read it, and you're
Yeah,
getting out of
yeah,
it what you need to. I don't know who Hyde was. That didn't keep me from enjoying the story. And
right,
and
right.
and so I'm all for those stories. Of course, I like the big long epics and everything. Like your run
Hmm.
on for Daredevil, I'm going to read it, and I'm not just saying that because I'm
If you want,
talking to
if you
you.
want to, if you want to start somewhere, I actually just did this mini series. I don't know if it's that in focus or not, but like there's this Black Armor, Daredevil Black Armor, which is
Daredevil
like
Black
this.
Armor. All right.
So they just did. They asked me to come back and like tell a Daredevil story like about a year and a half ago, um,
Excellent.
and it takes place in Marvel's '90s, sort of thing. But
Great.
um, I was very pleased with how this turned out. So
Oh, that's
if you
good.
want a little taste of my
Yes.
my take on Daredevil beyond what you've seen, this was fun.
Yeah. And like I said, the stories that I'd mentioned, I've got very little, but I mean, I love the Netflix series. I love what's so far
Yeah.
what I've watched with the new series and stuff. It's like I do like the character. Time, as you get older, just becomes a real son
Oh,
of a bitch. You know,
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah. And
oh
you
my
run
gosh,
a
when can I read
show,
something?
that has Batman in the title. So you
He
gotta you
does.
gotta you gotta choose your focus.
I gotta choose Batman first, always.
Yep.
But I really do. I mean, it's been an hour already. Doesn't feel
Oh,
like it's been an
cool.
hour.
Okay.
And
Good.
I
Good
I
conversation
appreciate
then.
you sitting and talking with me, Dan. So if you want to plug away, so you just did a fairly recent Daredevil book because Daredevil's everywhere right now. Daredevil
That's
Black
true.
Armor,
Let,
but
let me let me do my plugs.
yeah,
Daredevil Black Armor is still available as a nice little trade paperback. A lot of fun, retro '90s story. If people want to go check that out. I have a newsletter, which is called storymaze.substack.com, which right now for new subscribers, you can get my original Daredevil proposal that I wrote that won me the book. So that's a kind of a free little giveaway if you choose to subscribe. I'm running a Kickstarter or pre-launch for a Kickstarter. If people want to go on tinyurl.com/axles, AXLES Infernal. Infernal. It's a kind of a grindhouse supernatural road trip story,
Nice.
which is a lot of fun, but you can get a preview of it, the great art, little movie trailer, and we're just looking to kind of collect signups before we launch. And finally, at the end of April, there's a new series coming from Black Box Comics called Risk, Rysk, which is a near future cyber heist thriller adventure, which Mannix Francesco is the artist on, and he's done a bang up job kind of bringing this world to life. And if folks are into any of those things, they should get a kick out of it.
Excellent. You've said earlier on that you're a fan of horror. Have you gotten
Yeah.
to dive into horror for comic book writing?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I was the primary editor and then the writer on Clive Barker's Hellraiser and Clive Barker's Nightbreed back in the
Oh
90s.
yeah.
I created the Hellraiser Bible that turned his mythos, into comics. I wrote
Nice.
The Midnight Suns, which was Marvel's sort of spin-off of horror characters,
Great.
back in those days. And there's an evil little character I did called Terror Incorporated, which I just recently found out Disney Plus put on hold. They were doing a TV adaptation of it, which I didn't even know about. But then there was an
Ah,
article saying that they were putting it on hold. It was kind of like about a boogeyman assassin. But whether it comes
ah,
out of hold, I don't know. But it was nice to
sure.
sort of see it resurrected in that way. So yeah, I've
Yeah.
had a good chance to play with that.
Ah, good. Good. Because I gravitate toward horror as well. I
Yeah,
love horror,
yeah.
especially
I'm finding
comics,
some.
because sky's the limit with horror and comics, you know?
There's some really awful stuff. I keep picking
Yep.
up like anthologies that are like the biggest names in comics doing the boldest take on horror, and usually it's just like grisly, like look how much we can get away with, which I see no purpose of. But I just picked up Ice Cream Man. Have you seen this?
Yes, I've read some of Ice Cream Man. Yeah, that's good
I
stuff.
dig that. I
Hmm.
think that's like the real deal. It's like got dread, it's got existential stuff. That's doing it right. Harrow County's good too. I like that a lot.
Uh, and then I will wrap up, but it's my own fault
Yeah.
bringing in horror. But EC Epitaphs from the Abyss. Have you gotten into that?
No, no, no. Check it
EC
out.
Comics? Yeah. So another anthology, but just like so I tell whoever will listen of like, if you can dig into creepy,
Hmm.
because that is just like, oh, that is
The
for
original
me,
creepy or
yep,
like a new yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
original
yeah.
black and white creepy. I'm like, that
Yep,
should be like where everybody starts and looking at fantastic
totally.
horror stories. And yeah, this is a modern, modern writers and artists doing anthology issues. They've
Awesome.
released 8, I think, so far. Lieber Mayo's done the covers for every single one, and he's my favorite. And his art, watching him get to do art for covers and stuff is like
Oh,
gr
fabulous.
great, just like old comics back in the day, and those covers that would really be like, oh my gosh. So
Right, right, right.
that's one to check out. I'll throw that one your
Totally.
way of
No, thank you for the
look those up.
reco.
It's good stuff. Yep. So all right. I think that's gonna about do it. So again, thanks so much, Dan,
Yes.
for doing this. It's a pleasure
Yeah,
talking to
my
you.
pleasure. Glad we hooked up on the interwebs and got a chance to talk. So thank you again for the invitation.